deserved, coming back from the injury and kind of coming back and trying to push back into the top of the game. So yeah, just all the hard work and everything, it's paid off. I've been dedicated, professional, and good team around me, and it's these moments, it's the icing on the cake.
Facing Cam is always really, really difficult. We have really difficult battles already. For me, facing him is sometimes a nightmare, to be honest.
Olympic champion Belinda Bencic and the winner Samsonova. Coverage on the BBC from Control.
You're on the fastest route despite some traffic. You should arrive around 7:24 a.m.
And the Dutch cyclist Mathieu van der Poel returns the leader's yellow jersey on the third stage of the Tour de France. But his Alpecin de Clinic teammate Jasper Phillips in Belgium had to abandon the race for a crash. Fellow Dutchman Tim Merlier also got mixed up during the stage maybe is now wrong.
There's nothing like local knowledge. 3 stages and 3 winners from the lowlands so far. This frantic tour, which is way around France, is unusually hot. Belgium, Van der Poel's recent domination of races in France were spectators were alternating the western race to the north, and it's nearly 50 years since the legend of Belgium winning Rhodes was behind the Frenchman and they were tearing into the Charleston is for a while.
Now we'll be discussing how the finish lines are shaping up in Australia between 39 and 8 years.
Very much. It's just time to tell you now about a brand new series of gentle release starting this week.
What shapes a political life? What echoes of many minds for you?
I wanted what young black people didn't have, and that was power.
I sit down with figures who've influenced our politics to hear the stories behind their decisions.
She saw me as a cabinet's ambassador. I have done quite a lot of cabinet's ambassador, but I was also Scotland's man of the hour.
Conversations with leading public figures reflecting on their lives in politics. A new series of reflections with me, James Hall, on Radio 4 and BBC Sound starts this Thursday. 27 minutes to 7.
President Trump has insisted there's no hold-up on talks on reaching a ceasefire in Gaza. Dinner in Washington with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Trump said things were going along very well. Mr. Netanyahu told journalists he had nominated the US leader for the Nobel Peace Prize, saying he was forging peace as we speak in one country, in one region after the other. Israeli media is reporting that the country's defense minister, Israel Katz, has asked the army to look at ways of moving all Palestinians in Gaza into a camp in the south of the territory after screening them through security checks. International lawyers have condemned the plan. Trump the inquiry into the post office Horizon IT scandal, which the first party was trying to report today, will include an impact on what's likely to be one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in the UK. Thousands of some post monsters were wrongly accused of stealing, according to the Horizon IT systems today. President Macron arrived in the UK today for the first state visit by a French leader in 17 years. The state bank used to like
It is worth stressing this has always been a deal on the table. If Israel ends the war, Hamas has said it would release all the hostages, but Israel has so far rejected this, and there isn't a sign, at least for now, from these meetings between Trump and Netanyahu that Trump will give this. But let's see. And Netanyahu still has 2 more days in the US. He's meeting more members of the government, and no doubt will want something to announce at the end.
And there's also a new line from Israel's defense minister in terms of the detail, perhaps, about the relocation of Palestinians, as has been said to reporters. Do we know if this is an official government policy and what's been said?
The Israeli government's not really outlined a plan for a post-war Gaza that doesn't involve removing all the inhabitants. Different ministers freestyle various versions of this. The latest coming from Israel Katz, the defense minister, saying that he's asked the army to prepare plans to move all Palestinians into a camp on the ruins of Rafah in the south, initially housing 600,000 people, eventually the whole population of 2 million people. And he said that the goal was to bring Palestinians in after screening them to ensure they aren't Hamas operatives, and not allow them to leave, although his ambition was to encourage what he's described as voluntary emigration. He's dubbed this a humanitarian city, something the Israeli government also describes areas in Gaza like Al-Mawasi as humanitarian, a place for people to flee to, but they've been subjected to airstrikes in the last few weeks, so that language won't be reassuring to people there. International lawyers have described this plan as a blueprint for a crime against humanity. Both Donald Trump and Netanyahu were also asked last night about Trump's so-called relocation plan to move Palestinians out of Gaza. Trump said he's got cooperation from countries neighbouring Israel. In fact, Arab states have backed a counter-proposal to Mr. Trump's plan, which under international law would amount to expulsion.
You're in a 5-minute congestion caused by a collision on the M1. You're still on the fastest route.
Also previously rejected plans to relocate Palestinians because it says this would violate international law. Now, there is inconsistency around this particular topic. It seems there is generally consensus among Israeli ministers that a plan would involve moving people, mass of emigration from the Gaza Strip, but there is clearly a vacuum of a specific agreed strategy for this.
Jerusalem was one. Thank you.
It is 21 minutes to 7. Might there be a deal with France that tackles the migrant channel crossings, tackles it at source, at least at source in France? President Macron is in the UK for 3 days, of course, on his state visit. Henry Zeffman's our chief political correspondent. 1 in, 1 out, Henry.
That's the hope. As you say, Justin, this is a 3-day state visit, the first by a French president since Brexit, and so a lot of it is focused on the pomp and circumstance of a state visit, and Macron is being hosted by the King rather than by the Prime Minister. But it will build, as far as people here in Westminster are concerned, to what's being called an Anglo-French summit later in the week. And the big hope of the UK government there is that 1 in, 1 out deal you referred to, Justin. That would enable the UK to send back to France 1 person who arrived illegally in a small boat for every 1 person that Britain would then accept from France, who would be somebody deemed likely to have an asylum application here in the UK accepted, perhaps for purposes of family reunification, for example. And the purpose of that would be to demonstrate to those who are considering making that perilous crossing that if you come to the UK on a small boat, you could plausibly end up straight back in France, thereby the hope being that it would deter crossings. But the hopes of that deal coming this week don't seem to be especially secure. That is something that the UK government is going to be trying very hard to get over the line this week. Getting such a deal would be a breakthrough, not just for the policy itself, but also because it would mean France showing any willingness to take back migrants for the first time really since this all began back in 2018.
Meanwhile, a pep talk backbenchers.
That's right, this was Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, addressing the PLP yesterday. And really, I mean, in Parliament this week, for Labour MPs at least, it kind of feels like a week after the week before, as MPs still, I think, are digesting the implications of what happened last week on welfare and what it might mean more generally. Angela Rayner was actually very involved in trying to broker an eventual compromise of sorts, although I'm not sure how much the government really retained in their position, in this, in the welfare bill last week. At this meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party yesterday, she acknowledged that Labour MPs feel disheartened and bruised. She told her colleagues, "We must learn from this, and we will." And notably, she was seated next to Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, who, of course, her position came under a lot of scrutiny last week, but now I think the real scrutiny for the weeks and months ahead, what she's going to do in budget.
Exactly. Thank you.
It's 19 minutes to 7. Just a look time to look at the headlines and papers. On the front page of, actually, there's a lot of different stories across the papers this morning. On the front page of the Times, they've gone for the state visit from the French leader Emmanuel Macron, who's arriving in the UK shortly. The first such visit of a European Union leader since Brexit, and what we might like to try and get out of that. But there's also an incredibly striking photo on the same front page of the Times entitled "The Summer Camp Girls Lost in Texas Floods," and it's a picture of schoolgirls posing very sweetly, dressed in white with their arms around each other, all of whom have been lost or have been killed after those floods. It's a very affecting photo. Moving just across to the front page of The Guardian, the story we're going to come to very shortly. Bosses face ban on non-disclosure deals that silence victims of abuse. That's an amendment coming to Labour's employment rights bill. And just another one in the Daily Mail, which says only 1 in 2 are now leaving school already. A lot of the issues contributing. The reason for that is work experience opportunities in school.
Both the Mirror and the Sun focus on their front pages on Jeffrey Epstein and the decision by the FBI to announce that its probe into the paedophile's associates, as the Mirror puts it, is now over. This is something that's caused quite a stir in the United States because the Trump administration was preparing to publish what it said existed, which was a list of associates of Jeffrey Epstein. It has now suddenly said actually no such list exists, which has caused quite a big stir in the MAGA world, and it causes a stir here. Both the Mirror and the Sun say for Prince Andrew, who's going to face no charges over his links to Jeffrey Epstein. The Mirror says on this front page. He also says the victims are furious about the probe shut down. The Sun puts it more bluntly with regard to Prince Andrew. He can end his self-imposed travel ban, they say, and return to being Air Miles Andy after the FBI is closing its investigation into his Jeffrey Epstein links.
It's 16 minutes to 7. Backlash from last week's beautiful welfare cuts.
There's a lane closure ahead.
Breaking over ministers in the Commons yesterday with questions about how the government would make its figures add up now. Here's our parliamentary correspondent, Susan Green.
Last week was a bruising one for the government, with that Labour uprising over welfare cuts and a big last-minute U-turn from the government. As a new week dawned, the Shadow Chancellor Sir Mel Stride didn't intend to let bygones be bygones. He'd come to the Commons to demand that the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, explain how she was liable to balance the books according to her own rules, since all the recent U-turns totaled up to around £6 billion. Rachel Reeves was not there herself. Instead, her deputy, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, come on to say anything.
As the Shadow Chancellor knows, it is a long-standing convention of this and previous governments not to provide a running commentary on a fiscal forecast.
However, Darren Jones said the government was committed to sticking
traumatized. I'm not sure that shock has completely worn off yet. This is a small town, about 22,000 people. It's the type of town where this immense tragedy is going to, it's going to be a situation where everybody in the town is going to know someone who died. And it's an immense tragedy, and people are still in shock. They're still responding, they're working very hard to try and help their friends and neighbors. But in the days and weeks to come, the shock of this experience is going to require us all to sit down and take stock of how much we appreciate our community and how much we miss our friends.
At the same time, there's the emergency responders. All that happened in Tennessee and how the surge tonight.
They were here rapidly. They were here before the flood was even over, and they were already doing their job. We had local responders, we had responders from across the state of Texas, and we had responders from the entire United States that were coming to the Texas Hill Country to help us through this difficult time.
Especially those surge time from the survivors of the 40s.
We are still keeping our hopes up that we're going to find the survivors. We're still in rescue mode today, but we're also cognizant of the fact that it has now been 4 days since the flood, and at this time we're finding far more bodies than we are finding people who have survived. It's just unfortunate that as time goes on, we expect to find more and more fatalities.
Incredibly sorry.
You know, it's hard to wrap your head around what's happening here. I'm a long-time resident of this community. I'm a meteorologist by trade, and for all I have seen and known over the years, this is perhaps one of the worst disasters I've ever attempted. Of all of the hurricanes, of all of the fires, of all of the earthquakes, this has to be one of the most catastrophic disasters I've ever seen. It's almost tsunami-like as that 30-foot wall of water was crashing down the Guadalupe River. You have to remember this was a holiday weekend. People were gathered along the banks of the Guadalupe River in anticipation of a great celebration that was to go all day the following morning. And there were thousands of people in this little tourist community, and they were camped out in places where they may not have had access to television or radio or even good telephone reception. And this occurred at 4 o'clock in the morning. So all of those people that were camped along the river had almost no warning of the danger that they were in.
Richard Kulasa, thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you.
Good morning to you, Justin. Well, we've got a fairly quiet spell of weather on the cards with high pressure building its way in. So that's going to bring on dry weather. It's also going to introduce some warmer air, so temperatures are set to rise through this week. And many of us will see a return to heat wave conditions right around about Wednesday, Thursday onwards. But today, most of us are looking up to a dry start to the day. Pretty fresh out there. We've had temperatures as low as 2 degrees, in fact, across the north of Scotland. There's a little bit more cloud most of the east coast, so through southeast England, eastern England, northeast England. We'll hear patchy cloud around, tending to break up through the day, so a bit more sunshine developing later here. And temperatures in the northeast of England around 22 degrees or so, down towards the southeast of 25. For the rest of England, away from the east and Wales, as well as central and eastern Scotland, a dry day ahead with long spells of sunshine. So highs around 20 to 22 degrees. Around and lighter winds than some days. But towards the far northwest, so western Wales, the far west of Scotland, as well as in Northern Ireland, all here and that bringing some drizzle on the drizzle here. The highs around 16 to 19. Now through tonight, most of us looking
initially house about 600,000 Palestinians and eventually the whole population of more than 2 million people. He said the goal was to bring Palestinians inside after screening them to ensure they were not mass operatives and they would not be allowed to leave. He also emphasized his ambition to encourage Palestinians to voluntarily emigrate. International lawyers have described the plan as a blueprint for a crime against humanity. The Palestinian presidency has previously rejected plans to relocate Gaza's population, arguing it would violate international law.
Public inquiry into the post office and Rise 9 scandal published the first part of its final report today, looking at the human impact of what's widely believed to be one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in the UK. Thousands of sub-postmasters were wrongly accused of stealing from their own branch accounts when a faulty computer system was to blame. As our business correspondent Alison said.
After nearly 3 years of focus, Williams will deliver the first volume of his findings on the harm and the suffering endured by sub-postmasters in every part of the UK, caused by faults within the housing complex. He'll also give us conclusions on compensation, whether the various schemes are living up to the promise of being full and fair. This is something he's taken a big interest in, given how pressing and difficult the issue still is for many victims. Dozens of them are expected to attend today, while others watch from home. The second part, what happened and who is to blame, will be delivered until next year.
President Macron will arrive in the UK today for the first state visit by a French leader in 17 years. He'll be honoured with a state banquet at Windsor Castle, where the King will say the UK and France must work together to face the multitude of complex threats in the world. Mr. Macron is expected to discuss action on small boat crossings to Cyprus and Keir Starmer. CNN correspondent Daniela Ralph reports.
Military rehearsals in Windsor are the first they've been in the town for a state visit since the Irish president came here in 2013. Emmanuel and Brigitte Macron will be given a carriage procession through Windsor and a guard of honour inside the castle compound. Later, the president will address MPs and peers of Westminster. In his speech at the State Banquet this evening, the King will talk of the multitude of complex threats faced by both the UK and France. He'll stress the need for cooperation and say these challenges know no borders.
A report by the Children's Commission for England is warning that some young people are facing Dickensian levels of poverty. The government says it will publish fully funded plan later this year to tackle the structural and root causes of child poverty. Social Press correspondent Michael Cannon has more details.
This report gives an insight into what it means to be a child living in poverty. Kitchens for poor subplots in food. There's the milk bottle and shelter apart, being offered no up-to-date food. The research team spoke to 128 children aged between 6 and 18 as a report of 500,000 children in the UK and France is living in poverty. The Children's Commercial Crime Campaign Rachel D'Souza says a series of practical steps will make a huge difference. Bring cost down by schooling children, automatically signing eligible fathers to preschool meals, and scrapping the two-child benefits bill. The research is intended to inform the child poverty strategy. Ministers are due to unveil later this year.
The Chief Inspector of Prisons has called on the government to do more to stop the widespread flow of illegal drugs into jails in England and Wales. In his annual report, General Clerk makes a stark picture of drug use in the prisons, saying it's undermining every aspect of life for inmates and preventing rehabilitation work. More details from our senior UK correspondent, Cindy Kitchen.
Illegal drugs are smuggled into prisons by some visitors and staff for unknown offences or collected from drones. The report says inmates find it easy to get hold of drugs and far too little is being done to keep them out. The rate of positive alcohol tests frequently reached more than 30% over the last year. Most worryingly, the Chief Inspector says, drones were making regular deliveries to HMP Manchester and Long Lartin, which holds some of the most dangerous men in the country. Violence is on the rise in step with the supply of drugs, with more assaults recorded on staff and between prisoners. The government says it's investing £40 million to bolster security, while increasing cooperation with police to stop the flow of contraband substances.
The government is seeking to change its own employment legislation to give more protection to victims of harassment or discrimination in the workplace. Ministers hope an amendment to the Employment Rights Bill will nullify non-disclosure agreements, which prevent victims from speaking out. political correspondent Ian Watson reports.
Employers would be banned in future from using non-disclosure agreements or NDAs to silence employees who suffered harassment and discrimination in the workplace if the government's changes to its own employment legislation are agreed. Employees who signed NDAs can be reluctant to speak out for fear of legal action. Under the government's proposals, NDAs could still be used for the original purposes, such as maintaining commercial confidentiality. Campaigners and trade unions have welcomed the move. The nursing union, the RCN, said it would ensure victims of bullying and abuse would no longer be silenced.
The first malaria treatment suitable for babies and very young children has been approved for use. It's expected to be rolled out in African countries within weeks. Here's our global health correspondent Dominic Hughes.
In 2023, malaria was linked to almost 600,000 deaths, almost all of them in Africa, and around 3/4 of them in children under 5 years old. Malaria treatments do exist, but until now there were none specifically for the very youngest babies and small children. Doses for older children may not be safe for babies whose liver functions are still developing and who process medicines differently. A new treatment developed by the drug company Novartis has been approved by authorities in Switzerland and is likely to be rolled out in the worst hit regions within weeks.
Dominic Hughes reporting. Caroline, thank you. 9 minutes past 7. President Macron will be here, sadly not in the today programme studios, or not that we know, but in the UK shortly for his first state visit, the first European Union leader to be invited for such a visit since Brexit. The French president will be addressing Parliament this afternoon, we don't know what he will say yet, and attending a state banquet this evening with the King and Queen at Windsor Palace. What are we trying to get out of this visit? And what is he? And what is possible to achieve? Sylvie Bowman is the former French ambassador to the UK 2014 to 2017. Good morning.
Good morning.
How do you read this visit in terms of the goals?
Well, I think it's a very important visit because there hasn't been a state visit since 2008, and we are very similar countries, same populations, same economy, permanent members of the Security Council, and also military projection capabilities, and we have similar views on Ukraine and also Iran. So I think it is very important. The summit after the meeting with the King also is important for that. And so we have a close cooperation on defense issues. There will be the enforcement or the strengthening of the Lancaster Treaty, and also some other cooperation projects such as Hinkley Point C, the power plant. So there's a lot of things to discuss and to decide together.
And the issue of illegal crossings and how that will work. There's a lot of attention and focus, certainly in the political world today, about what can be done over that.
Yeah, there's been discussions between the Home Secretary and Minister of Interior in France, and we are strengthening our cooperation. You know, it's difficult. We decided to close the jungle years ago to seal the harbor of the tunnel, but of course now they're trying with small boats all along the coast, which is very long in France. So it is difficult, but we're making an effort in that.
There's a lot of anger, though, from some around what the UK has spent. I mean, if you just look at the front page of the Daily Mail for one temperature check, the front page says hand back our £771 million this time. In terms of the lack of progress some feel has been made around cracking the escalating small boats crisis.
Yeah, but you know, at the same time, the UK is paying because we are doing the job for the UK, and so we're doing the public's job. And again, I agree that it is very difficult because it's a very long coast, and so you can't prevent all of them, but we're doing our best.
Yeah, but I suppose it's that discussion of our best and what that means, and yet there might be there might be an opportunity here from the point of view of President Macron and what the French officials may want and think. But how much will his ability to do to make any of those changes be stopped by other EU countries?
Yeah, you mean on which issues? The issues of...
Sorry, around migration and small boats.
Yeah, it's no, I don't think it will be stopped by other countries, but again, they're using this coast, and it's easier to seal a tunnel and a harbor than a very long between the two countries.
I suppose the idea of this policy that's been floated again in some of the papers and reports today, that the UK government hopes to agree a one in, one out policy for those coming in with family ties.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been proposals on that, and we will discuss that.
Okay, so Sylvie Berman, we'll see how it goes. It will be quite a spectacle, won't it, seeing Emmanuel Macron arrive, and the carriage and the state banquet and the addressing of Parliament. Any insight to steer on what will be said?
Well, I think they will discuss a lot also, not only on bilateral relations, but also Ukraine. There is this coalition of the Vatican, so it will discuss as well.
Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu together again at the White House. Tumultuous few weeks, it is fair to say, in the Middle East. Talk last night of diplomacy and of peace. Talks with Iran, a ceasefire at least in Gaza, a ceasefire that Donald Trump said Hamas was willing to agree to. He was asked what's the hold-up between the two sides agreeing such a truce.
I don't think there is a hold-up. I don't think there's a hold-up. I think things are going along very well.
Tom Baker watched the whole event. We started with that moment of planned drama at the start of the dinner.
Before they started, the Israeli leader pulled out a piece of paper, handed it to Donald Trump, and said, "Here is the letter I will bring to the Peace Prize Committee nominating you for the Nobel Peace Prize." That is, of course, the accolade that Donald Trump has many times said he was not the cause, definitely denied it unfairly when he got the Abraham Award and so on. So, a portion of flattery being served up at the start of this meal, which then went into these talks, as I say, focusing on all sorts of issues around the Middle East.
And just to focus on one of those issues, what happens in Gaza? Are they aligned completely on what happens after a ceasefire in Gaza?
Well, no, I don't think they are. I mean, what we had in February was this extraordinary moment where Donald Trump at the press conference suddenly said that the US is going to take over Gaza, Palestinians are going to be moved out, and we're going to turn it into the Middle East. That had gone onto the back burner somewhat. It's been talked about much, much less over the last 6 weeks, couple of months, especially after Donald Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia. Mr. Trump was asked about that. What was the most striking thing to me is if this was a sort of core part of his vision for post-war Gaza, the answer didn't give that away at all, because the first thing that Donald Trump did when he was asked about that plan, if it was still on the table, was to defer immediately to Benjamin Netanyahu, who just handed over the issue. So, and you then have the Israeli Prime Minister saying, this is the plan, it's visionary of Donald Trump, there is cooperation from other countries in the region, something Mr. Trump echoed, although that isn't actually true. The Arabs counter-proposal which would prevent Palestinians basically being expelled from Gaza, which would be the position under international law, both the White House and Mr. Netanyahu said this is a free choice. What we did learn actually was that Mr. Trump said, and he handed over to Steve Witkoff, his envoy, to say that he says the Iranians have asked for talks and that these will take place. Mr. Witkoff said as early as next week. So clearly that diplomatic track, at least as far as the White House is concerned, is up and running. There was nothing on the sort of critical detail about, obviously, Mr. Trump's claim that Iran's nuclear facilities have been completely obliterated, something that the International Atomic Energy Agency doesn't back that assessment. But it was interesting that Mr. Netanyahu talked about the potential need to sort of go and revisit and monitor Iran's nuclear program even after what had happened. So, there is a nod to the fact that this now has to be dealt with. The question is whether the Iranians are going to be prepared to come back to the negotiating table in a meaningful way. But certainly, as they got from
minutes past 7.
The UK steel industry still doesn't know what taxes will be applied to its product in the coming days and indeed weeks. Sean has been looking into it.
Trump has now delayed those tariffs, the higher rates of tariffs that he wanted to put in place until August the 1st. Those tariffs on American imports. You might remember car makers, aerospace manufacturers here in the UK were part of that agreement with the US to have a tariff reduction, but not the steel industry. So right now, British Steel is temporarily taxed at 25%. Gareth Stace is the Director General of UK Steel that represents the steel sector's industry in the UK. Gareth, morning to you.
Morning, Sean.
So, if there isn't an added agreement with the United States, are there still some plans being put in place that that tax might increase to 50% for the UK?
Well, that's, 2 months ago today, on the 8th of May, that's what President Trump said. The 9th of July, he may, and May is, I think, important, increase the tariffs to 50% from 25%. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think he's going to do that. I think the President, along with the UK government, is keen to get a steel deal, which is critical for us. And I think all we need to do is get those details over the line. And I know that the UK government is doing everything it can. I think it's more about the US administration being thin on the ground and wanting to do too many deals.
Right, so maybe wanting to do too many deals. Still, consequences for the steel industry here. What is happening while you don't know what the level of tax will be on these goods in a few weeks' time?
Well, it can really be summed up by saying we are experiencing at the moment uncertainty, and uncertainty. Do steel producers put their steel on a boat, send it across the Atlantic? It takes 3 weeks to do that. Well, in 3 weeks' time, will we have 0% or 25%? Or, as I said, even though I think it won't happen, 50%.
But are they? What are they actually doing right now? You say it's uncertainty, but are they not delivering that stuff right now? Are the boats stopping?
Well, they were holding off, they were delaying, but there's only so much you can stretch that elastic in terms of delivering to your vital customers. And so what we are then also seeing, and one of UK Steel members last week told me his biggest customer in the US has just said, I'm going to go somewhere else, I'm going to cancel all the deals with you.
Where are they going?
Well, they're going to have to look for somewhere else, and that might be in the US, but normally when we supply to the US, it's because US steel producers don't make a particular product that we're exporting to them. But it was more about that deal was broken, more about that the company in the US needed that certainty, and they were not getting it because the deal is not there agreed yet, and it needs to just get over that line.
Gareth, thank you. Gareth Stace, the Director General of UK Steel.
Sean, thank you. It's 22 minutes past 7. Non-disclosure agreements are to be no more under this Labour government. These are the legal mechanisms that stop people from speaking out and sharing information about a person or a place of work where usually they've been poorly treated. Businesses are set to be banned from imposing NDAs, as they're called for short, on victims of harassment and discrimination as part of Labour's bid to boost workers' rights. Louise Hay is the Labour MP for Sheffield Heeley. She's a former Cabinet Minister. She happens to have also campaigned extensively on this issue.
This announcement will ban NDAs in cases of harassment and discrimination. For far too long, victims of both these issues have been silenced, and organisations have been allowed to get off scot-free with their wrongdoing. This legislation now will protect victims, allow them to speak up and challenge organisational wrongdoing when it's happening in plain sight. Millions of workers suffer harassment or discrimination every year in their workplaces, whether it be a hospitality worker who's sexually assaulted by their boss or by a customer and who's then NDA'd and forced to be silent of their treatment in return for a settlement. This will mean that they are now able to speak up about their abuse, recover from their trauma, and organisations will have to make sure that their workers are protected from such harassment in the future.
Listening to that and joining us in today's programme studio is Zelda Perkins, founder of the campaign group Can't Buy My Silence UK, CBMS, and former PA to the convicted sex offender and former film mogul Harvey Weinstein, who's currently in prison. Zelda, good morning.
Good morning.
You've been working on this for a long time.
7 years.
So hearing that this is going in. I mean, just let me make sure I've got this right when I say NDAs are to be broken no more in this particular context or overall.
In this particular context, but we also have two other pieces of legislation in the last couple of years. So the Victims in Prisons Bill, there are protections which will void in it if they're a victim of crime, which closes one loophole. You'd have thought that that would be in legislation already, but that's there now. And also in the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act. So, and that actually was what set precedent to really push this piece of legislation, because we had a two-tier system, because it meant if you were an academic, for instance, or were protected, you can't use an NDA in cases of discrimination or harassment. But let's say you were a cleaner who worked for an outsourced company, you wouldn't.
Thank you guys for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the travel. Have a safe trip to everyone. Thank you.
Particular story and your decision to break your NDA, just remind our listeners what